Hell yeah, let's go.
Welcome to the 20 Sided Lyceum. Here there be a relaxing recess filled with discourse and entertainment that won't impale you, usually. Today we are talking about the OSR game that I am currently running with a player from that game, Max Anthem. Without further ado, let's begin. So, today we are going to be talking with my friend Max here. Say hello, Max.
Hello.
We have both been part of a game that I've been running in the old school Renaissance style, and we just wanted to have a chat about what that means and like I've done a decent amount of it, but Max, this is sort of his first foray into the that side of the D&D spectrum, and I wanted to sort of get your opinion, Max, on how it feels, and what it looks like to run that sort of game, especially compared to what is considered the more the pop option, like 5e, or maybe even if you're into it, like Pathfinder Second Edition, or even like I would say, like, some people play Shadowrun or Call of Cthulhu, like those. Even those ones are like more in the know than I would say, like Lamentations of the Flame Princess is a good example of one of the old school adaptations, or we're playing with the old school Essentials adaptation, and a lot of it is based on the second edition of D&D, and that edition was made in a different time, and sort of fitting a different style of dungeon delving. Really, there's been a lot more narrative, I feel like, coming into the game as the time has gone on, and that wasn't, that it's not like narrative never existed, but it did sort of become more of a focus. And then, as well, with that, the mechanics of having a table where there is a miniature setup, and you see your player characters and your monsters moving along grids. um, that has been much more in vogue lately. But just to start out, get us warmed up, I wanted to ask what your favorite character that you've ever played was, of any kind of D&D, back to 3.5 or whatever, whenever you started playing.
Ooh, that's a question. Yeah, so actually, just so you know, so you're aware, I started playing D&D with 5e.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
So
Awesome.
I'm a bit of a newer player in the sense that, I don't have that experience
Yeah,
of
that's perfect. Yeah.
the back in the days too much. Yeah, so for me, actually, it was pretty much right when it came out. Like, it was like, I think, God, it was something like a week or two after it released is like when
Mhm.
I started playing D&D.
Wow,
Um
yeah. It's a good time to start, right when the new rule set drops.
yeah, some friends and I were kind of just all talking about gaming and tabletop gaming, and just kind of chatting about video games in general, and we're all at a bar, and all of a sudden he was like, "Let's do it. Let's play," and they were like, "You want to host it?" And I'm like, "Fuck it, sure. Let's do it. Why not, right?" So I got a player's handbook, I think, from like a local grocery store, or the beginner's guide or whatever it was, and
Mhm.
we just learned how to play.
Yeah.
um so I kind of started off DMing, which was an interesting endeavor considering I had never played D&D before.
Oh,
And
yeah. That
I
that
mean,
can be it is a world unto itself.
oh yeah. Yeah, and one thing I learned very quickly was that um I'm terrible at it at that time, right? Like, I had no idea what I was doing, no idea what I even expected. Um so it took quite a while for me to have a first character, I guess, is my point in all this story, because
Mm,
I spent a lot of time developing characters for other people to interact with.
right.
But I'm actually, it's somewhat exciting for me though, because I spent so much time being creative for other people that when it finally came time, Max, I get to play. Max, who is your PC and what are you playing? It was like the most exciting moment of my life, because I got to go, oh my gosh, here we go. This is my chance.
Yeah.
Um, I think that my favorite character I ever played was a Furbolg character. And his name was, well, it was spelled out Blue Thing. He was a paladin, and the reason that I love this character so much is because I didn't play him like any sort of class.
Mm,
And that's partially also why I enjoy 5e so much, is because it allows you to just kind of do things sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're at a negative. So my character was a like a nature paladin. He was all for the wilderness, the experimental mushrooms, and just having a good time.
yeah.
And the
Yeah.
people I played with were real big on role play. So my first foray into D&D was DMing, which I learned I more enjoy the story driven, role play elements. And then when I finally got to play a character, it was the same kind of setup. So it was really great. And this character just became, um I don't know how to describe it. The voice I did for him was very different than anything I've ever done before. It was a very different character from even who I am.
Mm.
Um, I'm not a big time druggie or anything like that. So, you know, I,
Yes,
yeah.
none of us are.
Right, I hate drugs. But my point being though, like, it was very different than the loud fighter types or over the top bards that I might normally play. This character was very kind of held back and reserved in a way, and it was so much fun. I never had so much fun playing a more unique character, and
Hmm.
that's one that sticks out the most.
Yeah, sort of like a more you had time to make it a little more subtle or have like
Yeah.
little character interactions that built up into big character
Oh
interactions.
my gosh, did they? It got to a point where the players I was playing with, I think they loved the character even more than I did at some points,
Sure.
because the
Yeah.
things I was able to do playing such a reserved character had more of an impact. Be it a sad moment, a happy moment, an excitement.
Mm.
I remember a moment when I finally got to have my character rage out a little bit because the rest of the party, except for one other person, was downed, and there was six of us. So they were either like they got caught by bandits, or they were roped up like in traps, and they weren't like down. They were just incapacitated. They couldn't fight or do anything. And my
Mhm.
character had built up quite an assortment of attack abilities, including the ability to use a tattoo on his arm, like a Groot arm. He was able to like extend it out
Oh,
like in
yeah,
tree
yeah.
branches and attack multiple people.
That's
And
cool.
I role played it out. And it was a very different feeling because I took this character that's more of just happy go lucky, gonna wander about and eat mushrooms and dandelions, and all of a sudden he's yelling, get away from my friends, and knocking the heads off of bandits. And
Mm.
I ran he ran down a couple of bandits who tried to get away, and he managed to
Mhm.
capture one, and I beat him to a pulp because he almost killed my friends. And
Yeah. It
but then I
meant
immediately
something.
but then I calmed them back down right away.
Yeah.
It was just one of those moments where it was like, oh wow, like it was just more impactful versus like a fighter who's always fighting.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like, it sounds like an amazing part of the story. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do agree. The amount of, narrative that you get to put into one character is just, it is amplified by, the fact that you're only thinking about that character, or, you are only acting as that character, and so you sort of, feel it out and you're like, no, not quite that, it's more like this, and then and it's not just like a two sentences and then maybe the players move on from from someone that you thought about for like the whole week. You're like, oh, they're gonna interact with this blacksmith and he's gonna have an interesting thing to say, and then they like completely brush by him or something, like that's
Right. Yep.
yeah, it's like you will definitely be acting as this character when when you're a player, for
That
sure.
is so very true. It's like
Yeah.
pent up need for role play as a DM, then you get to just unleash it all.
Yeah, yeah. And I've felt that way recently too because, I've been running games, but I've also been getting into some stuff with my local hobby shop, and and seeing sort of a younger game master uh work through his stuff, and it's really interesting to be on the player side after not doing it for a very long time, I'm also playing in another OSR type game, and like the differences but in how I make characters is evident. You take you take an idea in the 5e setting, and you sort of like um you chunk it down until you have like the sort of the core, and then and then you've got all of these mechanical choices to make, as well as and you were talking about how in 5e you can you can sort of just ignore the mechanic aspect of it a lot of the time, because like the game sort of plays itself at times. You walk into a room, you're gonna you're gonna roll perception, and like some classes are much better at it because they have either advantage, or they have the built-in skill boost, the proficiency, and so like, but because that's the case, you sort of don't have control over it. So focusing more on who your character is makes a lot more sense than, like, at least to me, for the role playing part of it. There are certainly people who do min maxing and stuff, and then they just like tear through a dungeon. But that doesn't, I think we're not really talking about that at the moment.
Right. Yeah.
And but like that, and that does exist. But like there is the ability to just sort of let the game do the work for you, and that allows you to focus more on the character aspect, uh, and you don't you get a certain ability array, but levels come every few weeks, if that, depending on if you're playing like a milestone game or whatnot. But yeah, so I guess the thing that I was wondering is like how like compared to obviously your favorite character was a 5e character, and and I've seen you playing the character that you have now, and yeah, like what is the like what is the biggest difference that you're sort of feeling as you're playing through the old school game with the current character that you have?
Yeah, so there's a very clear difference there. And it's something I think we talked about very briefly at one point just on Discord there when we were chatting about the game and how it's going and things like that. And you know, I very much enjoy small group D&D. I want a DM and 3 players, a DM and 4 players, and kind of that's it. I don't like large groups. In the game that we're playing with the old school, there's only 4 of us.
Hmm.
which I'm very excited about. Um, However, that there's it's such a different style of game. So, whereas I'm used to both as a DM or even in 5e, I'm used to just everything being narrative. Every room, every hallway, um everything is almost part of a story. Yeah, you do dungeon delve and just kind of loot in 5e and have fun with that. But it's almost like I attribute the game we're playing now to almost being like Skyrim.
Mm,
Whereas you're going somewhere for a purpose and for a point, but the main point is to get money and kind of kill monsters. Um and because of that, it's almost like in my mind, and this isn't anything against you as a DM at all,
mhm,
but
mhm.
in my mind, it's almost like a distraction from the pieces I enjoy the most about D&D, which is like role play and story and almost like trying to either cause emotions in others or develop them yourself for a moment, almost like you're watching a movie or reading a book or telling a story at a campfire or whatever it might be, right? It's like all about driving
Yeah.
that response from others and also from within you. So, like in the game the game that you're running for us, it's very, very, very much mechanical. Like one of the things I joked about was like, does every door have to always close after we go through it? Right? It's like, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and where it seemed like you kind of listened to that feedback, you didn't have to because the gameplay might dictate. Well, yeah, you never know what's on the other side of it. Doesn't matter how many hallway doors there are, how many doors there are to the different rooms. Part of the game is checking for traps, it's checking for monsters, it's checking for surprises, it's
Mhm.
listen checks and all those kinds of things,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, and so that's one thing I'm having a real hard time getting used to. And I think I'm taking away from my ability of role play and story and things like that to really focus on those mechanics.
Mm.
And I think it's mostly I would say it's because I'm just not used to it. I don't really
Sure.
understand yet how much to focus on each piece of it. And nothing against my partners in the game, but I mean, it also could be group composition too.
Mhm.
One of the players I've never played with before, and they kind of have a hard time being at the sessions either on time or for the whole time, which kind of
Sure.
limits our play time together of getting used to each other. Not to say we haven't had fun moments, we have obviously. Um, then the other player is someone I've known for a long time, but they play more of a reserved kind of character, it seems like. So it's hard to really
That is very true, yes.
it's almost like who do I role play with? And I'm just stuck role playing with you, your NPCs, right? That's
Oh,
who I
woe.
have to
Woe
really
is you.
right. Well, I don't mean that as a bad thing, obviously,
No,
right?
I
But like
understand, yes.
yeah, but that's why, like when a goblin shows up, I want to have fun with it and talk to it because it's
Mhm,
like that's
mhm.
my moment to RP, and you're like, no, it's a villain, it's gonna kill you, and I'm like, I don't care, I want to ask it how it's doing today, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
in the dining scene, right? It was supposed to be just you probably expected me to walk in, see a bunch of enemies, panic, and draw my sword, but I was like, no, I want to like have this moment with this goblin and with this larger orc or whatever it was on my right, like
Sure, yeah.
and I wanted that only because it's like, well, I want to role play something, It's
Mm.
got to be something more to this than just check your corners, gather your loot, and leave.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I could understand that, and yeah, and I think that there is yeah, there's a certain threshold for understanding the game, like you had mentioned just now, and once I think that there is it's sort of like a plateau where you get there and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, like we do these things sort of quickly, and then we can get to the part where we are tying up a goblin and using it as a, as a compass to get us to the next, thing that we actually want to get to. Which, by the way, that is the part of the game that I think, really does shine, right? Like, and I it's, if we're already talking about it, like I would encourage you to keep doing that. And I do think that we have a bit of a, an activity skew, right? It's like you sort of know now more so how to play at least a character who can speak. And
Yeah.
and then we've got the other, one of them is like was like, oh, I would love to play any kind of D&D, and that's why she's there. And then I don't know what I don't know what Z is doing. He's honestly, I love the guy. He is being quiet. I think he's playing his character, but because his character is, sort of like dark and brooding or whatever, it's lending itself to him not speaking up at certain points, which yeah, I mean, maybe there's something to be said for like I have found myself to also be focusing on mechanics and stuff, right? Like that is it is a new experience in games mastership as well for me, right? Like I am honestly, I was thinking about like putting in um perception checks again. Like that was like it was sort of like as a, not as a crutch, but sort of as a, like a, oh, you haven't seen this thing, so I will just roll for it when your characters get into that room. And every time you get into that room, it's possible you notice it, right? Like that is a thing that I think I want to incorporate, because it is a thing that existed in the fifth edition, but it doesn't really exist in old school. Like
Yeah.
usually you as a player, you say like, oh, I'm gonna look behind the waterfall, and then when there is something behind the waterfall, the the game master doesn't hide it, right? Like
Right.
you usually you're like, yes, you do find something behind the waterfall. And I think that I that's the part that I don't want to remove, right? Like I do want people to see a room full of, because you guys have already sort of passed it and interacted it with a bit. Like I want people to see a room full of furniture, and it's covered in white sheets and stuff, and I want you to be like, oh, what's under these sheets, right? Like that, or any of the other rooms where there happens to be something in it. And
So that
and yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I wanna comment on that part. So that's the part where I start to really, really struggle. Um, so, for example, and I wanna ask you a question after I say this too,
Sure, love it.
um, if you don't mind. Uh,
I
so
I do not.
very good. So, you know, that's like that Skyrim piece again. That's that piece where it's like, okay, so you walk in a room and yeah, and I remember this. You described all the furniture and all the chairs. It's like in the meat locker, all the hanging meats and all the different
Mhm,
types. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, so I'm picturing all of this, right?
mhm,
And I in my mind, so I think I have the answer that you might give already in my mind, but during the session when all these things are being described, it's like, well, I mean, okay, so I'll lift the sheet on the first chair, first row to the left. Now I lift the sheet on the first row, second chair to the right of that, first row, third chair. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I approach it as a organized, like time consuming thing,
mm, mhm,
right? So when you describe a room, I typically, this is with any DM, I typically listen to the DM's description to try to find out what could what might be something to look at, whether it's real or not, whether it's intentional or not.
Sure.
Sometimes you can spend a lot of time describing something mundane just to make your
Mhm.
players really
Yeah.
analyze it for no reason.
Sure,
It's like,
sure.
no, it's just a sewer drain. I was
There's
just
like
describing the
yeah.
scent and like,
There's a
right?
candle and it's staring at
And it's
you. Yeah.
burning. No, it's just a cat candle, man. It has eyes. It looks like look at there's nothing special about it, right? So
Mhm.
like, but so while I wanted to look underneath all of those sheets in that room, at the same time I was like, well, that's gonna take forever. Like, how many chairs are in here? And
Sure.
like, is this really important? Like, I'm gonna loot 82 chairs, like,
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
which you could, but like, is that worth it? You know, and it was the same thing in the meat locker. It was like, okay, well, all right, so I want to check each of them for like gold hidden inside of them. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I want to try to find out if there's any. I think I did ask you in the session. I said, are there any rare creatures that are butchered in
Mhm.
here? Right? Because
Right,
my whole
yeah.
idea
And
was, oh well, if there's like some weird duck or some weird animal that only comes from the Fey realm somehow butchered in there, it's like, well, I want to take that meat. That's worth something,
sure. Yeah,
right?
that would be interesting, right?
Yeah.
And and yeah, and I agree with you, right? Like it would be interesting if there was something in there. But I want to, sort of pose something back, it's like um not every room is interesting, right?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know like that's sort of the point of like the furniture room, or like there's a kitchen and a meat locker next to it. Who knew,
Oh,
like
shocking.
like yeah, and yeah, and like I do think that there are things that are in the dungeon, right? Like there are maybe there's a footlocker where a one of the orcs is like uh keeping a health potion that maybe somebody sent him specifically a health potion and not everybody gets one or something, and so like it's possible that he's hiding it, right? And you could maybe find that, right? And that would be interesting. um but it wouldn't be interesting if like every Foot Locker that you go into, it has the same seven things in it. Or
Right.
actually, well, that kind of would be interesting in certain cases, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
Like that
Yeah.
there's a lack of interesting things is also interesting in some cases. And but I am curious too, like the part where you're assuming that it's going to take a long time, and sort of doing a mundane task is that is something I guess I honestly didn't like. I guess I thought about it, but sort of more like if there is anything in the room and you guys say you're going to spend time dealing with it, that's sort of what the what the dungeon timer is for, right? Is you are ticking the clock forward in order to scour the room, right? You spend an
Right.
entire quote unquote dungeon turn doing lifting up things, and maybe that wasn't obvious.
And that's the
And
answer I knew you were gonna give when I was saying that, because
yeah.
very simply you would say, and actually I forgot about the dungeon term even thing, but I
Mhm.
mean, very simply the way you would
Right.
handle it is you guys spend time looking, and you would
Mhm.
do your rolls or whatever you have prepared, whatever it might be, and then we would get an answer. You find nothing. You find a bunch of plain chairs, or you find 8 gold coins hitting underneath whatever it might be, a piece of gum. You know what I
Right.
mean, right? You would respond at the end of the search,
Yeah.
what the results were.
Unless
So
unless you say specifically, I'm going to look
yeah,
here,
one
right? Like,
chair. Yeah,
yes, and I do, yeah, and I do want to differentiate between the one chair and the room, right? Like there are like when you guys stepped past the Everflame thing that you stole immediately.
Yeah,
It was an obvious thing, right? So I didn't withhold that information. It was just sitting there in the fireplace
right,
and not giving off any heat. That, it's like that's noticeable. Something that's not noticeable is like, oh, there's a weird gem chair that is, the size of a kobold in this room under a thing, right? And so you take the cloth off, and then it's like, oh, that's kind of a fancy chair, like
right.
much different than all the other chairs. And but yeah, no, it is interesting because I do think that working within the mechanics of the game, uh, that's not a thing that generally exists in the current version of the rule set, right? If you spend, well, sort of. I guess the equivalent would be, are you going to spend all of your spells and things, and is the dungeon that you are in big enough to warrant you not taking a rest before you get to like the end boss or something, and do you have to spend it's like, that's why Layman's tiny hut exists, because sometimes you need to spend exactly 8 hours resting inside of a refuge from things that don't have dispel magic, and it's like, if
Right.
someone did have dispel magic and they came across your safety bubble, that would be it's not a guarantee, right? But it's pretty good.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
that's a lot of that's the difference between, the mechanics I know in 5e versus, this game. I have to almost think of it and approach it in maybe slightly a different way.
Hmm.
Um, Not saying that they're super different from each other, but, as far as, where I guess where my mind power is going to make sure I understand the game. But one of the questions I
Right,
wanted to
right.
ask you was, we talked about a couple of times now, like the differences in player types almost.
Sure.
I like
Yeah.
to really be in the forefront in role play and be excited about things, and to the extent where even I refuse to roll sometimes on certain ability checks because I like to think that my character is distracted, or
Right. Yes.
just to give others an opportunity to do something sometimes, because sometimes I'm the only one in the front doing things, and it's like, well, no, my character is drinking a beer and not paying attention. He's not going to roll a perception check, or he's not going to
Hmm. Hmm.
investigate the thing that we need to.
Yeah, which is admirable.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, you want to help others feel included when they, you hope that they don't feel not included, so you
Right.
try to make sure that they do feel it somehow. But also, as a DM between 5e and this game, the old schools game, do you approach kind of getting, or not forcing, but convincing players to open up and interact? Do you approach it differently?
Hmm. That is an interesting question.
Or
I
do you or do you DM like that at all? You know what I mean? Like, is that something that's on your mind, is getting players to interact? Or
Oh,
if they
for
don't, do you
sure.
just not
Yes.
worry
I
about it?
No, 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 no. I definitely worry about it.
Okay.
And it is, and I will say, maybe before I answer your question, I I have been thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
It
Sure.
for the current game that we're talking about, it's I want the inexperienced player to experience more of the game. And part of that is introducing them to the mechanics, as well as the narration of their own character. And yeah, I guess it is because the mechanics are different. I would say that I do approach it a bit differently, and I think that the way that I approached the fifth edition, or even when I was playing, the older third edition games, um, you tend to make an arc, a narrative arc, uh as the as the campaign that your characters are going to run through. And so between point A and point B, or well, so I guess the way that I think about it is you make a point A, right? And that's where all your characters meet. And then, or the first arc of the game, maybe there are other arcs, but your characters meet. That's point A. Point B is the characters all get to the end of their first encounter together. What happens in between A and B is generally up to the players, and maybe there needs to be like an A, you start adding like an A1 or an A2 in order to maybe correct them a little bit if they are veering a little bit too far from point B. But once they hit point B, then it's like, then you're like, oh, okay, well, now they need to get from point B to point C, and point B to point C might be, after their first encounter, come up with a reason for them to stay together. And if they don't have one already, right? And this is just an example of a possible story arc. And so you would do the same thing, right? Like, okay, well, the players can make decisions. They know the city that they're staying in, and why would each of them want to stay together? Is it for money? Is it for loyalty? Is it for they have an obligation? Are they brother and sister? Any kind of things, and then you make them think about the B to C, and eventually you get them to C, and then you continue forward, right? So it's a continuing arc of various point to point uh story points, and in that you guide them along their adventure, but you don't make the in between decisions for them. That is the narrative that the players get to involve themselves in, and that you get to watch them make a different decision than the player next to them about the reason why their character might want to stay with this group or whatever, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of story arcs and why players might stay, or why maybe the group already is together. We were playing in another game where that is already the case, and so we're already at point C.
Right.
So what's point D? It's like, oh, there needs to be a big bad, or an environmental thing that are, an antagonist against our characters, so that we have the next point of our story arc. So like it is generally what I've been trying to do in the OSR game, but it is what I've found is that there's a lot more between the points, because there is a lot more, like if my goal was to, I'm not saying this is it, but like if point A is, oh, you guys arrive in town and you decide to work together, then point B is, why do you continue going to this oubliette and going through the gate, right? And I think you've gotten there for the most part, but then point C is like, what do what then is the goal of going into the dungeon uh over and over again, and why, what thing do you guys have to overcome? And I think that part is a bit harder to define, right? Because partly because you just haven't seen the whole dungeon, or you haven't really that to be a little transparent about the last session, it's like that. There was like a troll that could have one shot any of you, right? And that would have been, I think that would have been an interesting story point, because then you realize, whoa, uh we are not as invincible as we think we are, running, going through these rooms.
Yeah,
And that would have been interesting, right?
not
And
a
that would
free
have
for
been
all.
right, exactly. Um and I do think maybe that, that like didn't it didn't necessarily happen exactly that way, but like showing that hand, right? Like there is a door that you guys can't get into now, right? And so it's like, oh, what's behind that door? How do you open the door? There's
Right.
like there's multiple things that you need to open the door, and you have no idea how to get them or where they are. And you haven't found them yet. And so I think maybe like we're starting to get there a little bit, right? And I will admit that I'm again new at that style, and I maybe should have, like uh there was a game I played in where someone, like, there were a couple of people who were like under a geas in order to kill the thing that was in the dungeon. But in order to get to the thing that was in the dungeon, they had to go through 5 levels of dungeon. Ooh, excuse me. But that wasn't possible in 1 to 10 sessions, right? They needed like a whole 20 or 30 sessions,
Right.
and multiple groups of people going at it for that long in order to do so. And so it was very interesting because of that, and I guess that, to answer your question in a long-winded sort of way, I am thinking about it, but it is different, and not so it's not so direct as the as like, especially like the milestone experience gaining, right? I do want there to be a moment where you guys find a trove of treasure, and it's exciting, and you suddenly can't bring all of the treasure out of the dungeon at once because it's too heavy, right? Like that, like eventually that will happen, and it will be glorious. And we haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. So,
Right.
so yeah, I guess
That's
that's sort of the plot line in my brain, and yes, it is very different.
okay. Yeah, I figured it seemed different to me. So yeah, as you being a DM, that makes a lot of sense how you explain it
Mhm.
actually in your long-winded
Yeah.
way. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
but no,
yeah,
I follow.
sorry, I
I
kind
follow
of
along very easily. It all made sense.
yeah.
No, it was
When
good
I
though.
when I
Like,
get going, I get going.
when I listen to your podcast with Meg, I know
Mm.
Meg. She also can get long-winded, and then you are too. And I was listening to it last night or the other night, and I was like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do it. And the first question you asked me out here, I went out for like what, a half hour. So
Who
it's like,
knows?
God,
Yeah.
son of a bitch. Like,
You can't avoid it.
why do
It
I
is
have so
your
much to
fate.
say?
Yeah.
Yeah, cut the words down.
Yeah, no, it's true, and well, and I think maybe that something to take away, if from from this experience is like, it kind of doesn't matter what edition we're playing, like, it is intriguing
Yeah,
in several ways, right? And maybe it is different, but it's I think that the spirit of the game is still there, the heart of what we are trying to accomplish is still there, and the different systems are just a method to the madness, and they sort of bring us into the ability to do the storytelling, and really that's what, I guess, that is what I am here for. And and this is a different story for sure. It might not necessarily be the like we are the saviors of such and such, or we happen to be in the right place at the right time and therefore the world had didn't end.
Yeah, we haven't met a
um
king or a queen yet.
that's true,
There's
yes.
no glorious
Yeah,
white knight or dark knight or,
right.
none of those typical there hasn't even a dragon, like,
No, not even a
not even
dragon.
a dragon. So, yeah,
Yeah,
you're definitely spot on with that.
yeah. Yeah, and I yeah, maybe yeah, I guess it is a bit slower, for sure. And uh I did want to ask you, maybe this is a good point. Even though, so it is slower in the dungeon especially. But I was really wondering, also, because this isn't a thing that I think happens in 5e almost at all. Like I've never seen anyone else in any game I've played over the course of like the 10 years or so, um for current rule set of D&D, do a like town building thing, right? And I experienced my first town building thing in a game where the town was called Visor, and it was run by a man named Jeff Riens, and he is great. He has a blog. I don't know. I haven't really checked in on him in a while. One of the guys from that game is running another similar game, or actually like two of them are, and now I'm running something like that, so like he has influenced many people to enjoy this sort of thing where there is a downtime scheme going on outside and in between of adventures. And it sparked something in me, as and these other guys who I'm playing with, uh to want to do this, right? To want to bring not just bring the gold out of the dungeon and be like, ooh, shiny, but like to like do something with it other than just buying magic items or potions or hirelings to go back into the dungeon. It's like it is a thing that you want to see expand. And sometimes you're in a grand city that already has libraries and things, and you need money in order to um interact with those buildings or those already established guilds or something. That's one side of it. But then there's also like the side that I chose, which is there's nothing, and you are trying to make the grand city yourself, so that you are not only the adventurers who went into the oubliette and came out with great riches, but you are also the benefactors of an entire township, or an entire sort of fief. And that is another aspect of the game that I think that, well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, is like, is that part of this, because we do spend like 30 minutes or more sometimes, like just doing downtime stuff. And I wondered if that was interesting, or what your thoughts were on it.
Yeah, you did something similar in a game with 5e with the town, not the town, the castle. We renovated
Oh
the
yes, the little fort. Yes,
little
the
fort.
in the winter hold
Yep,
area, or wherever it was.
yep.
I do remember that now. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, and so I will say I have a little bit of a comparison between, like a 5e style of doing something like that versus, like the current method with the old school. And I remember the 5e version again, it was very, very role play heavy. And I know that the partner in the game that we played with, she's also very role play in her gaming style. She really
For
enjoys it. So
sure.
I also really enjoy it, and you do too. So obviously, it turned into us all trying to be directors and have a good time and making our own little movies, right? Like
Yes,
it was a
yes.
lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, there was a lot of new characters and
Yeah.
little people here and there.
Oh, and we laughed and joked and we had ideas about this this fort and what it could be and what we're gonna do in it and all the characters, the cook, the watchtower thing. It was
Mhm.
just it was full, but every single piece of that fort had a story as we built it.
Right.
From the bedrooms to the kitchen to the cook to the table we met at in like the unfinished living room area or whatever, the hall, the great hall that was like unfinished, unbuilt. But we had a big table in there,
Yeah.
and my character sat there all the time, and that's where we brought new people to. New characters joined us at that table, and that's where we kind of would set off on our adventures for the day. We'd handle all of our downtime activities and decide how we're gonna approach things and role play it. It was just, it was glorious getting a knife for the cook so he can, but I think he already had one, or I don't remember anymore. It's been a while, but we had all kinds of little things,
Mhm.
little pieces of the puzzle that we really hashed it out, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah,
can
I do
probably
remember that being
yeah,
good.
and you can probably see where I'm going with this because in the current game, it's more about the things that we're doing and less
Mm.
about why we're doing them.
Mhm, mhm.
In for me, in it just in life in general, I think a little bit like an entrepreneur business. I'm all about not working for the man, making your own money, right? I'm not gonna grow up on Social Security. I'm too young for that. I'm not gonna get so I have to. My whole
Sure.
mind is like you got to have your own money. You need residual income, right? So in a D&D game, it's like, okay, well, yeah, let's apply the same strategy. What's missing? And the town we're missing, the town we're in is missing everything, right? So I'm like, okay,
Yeah, that's
entertainment,
true.
blacksmith, leather working. I'm gonna make my own axes. I'm gonna sell. I'm gonna make my own leather carryings for the axes. I'm gonna have a axe throwing competition. Try to get huge warriors and fighters to come visit this town so I can hire them to go get loot out of the dungeon for me.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
That's the whole point of all of this is for me to just constantly scale up my operation. In Z's character is building a cellar underneath for like his like wicked evil experiments and poisons and stuff he wants
Yeah,
to
I'm not
do,
sure
right?
what he's doing yet.
Whatever though, like good on him. But
It's great.
it's more just like I think of it like like 7 Days to Die. Me and you have played that game extensively.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna replace these 10 blocks with these blocks, and cool. Now I
Mm,
have an open
mhm.
space,
I see, yeah.
right? Okay,
Yeah.
now I'm gonna buy a table. I'm gonna put the table in that space. Got a table now, right? Like there's none of that.
Mm.
Maybe it's not even. Maybe it's not supposed to be there. Maybe that's just the style of the game. But for me, it's like I miss that. When I would role play in the 5e when we were building, I could feel the cold air. Like we walked into this place that had no burning hearth, and it was like I felt it. It was like it's empty. It's
Yeah,
not a
yeah.
home, right? It's just an empty
True.
building. So, so while yes, I think it's really cool for this style of game, and it's fun, and
Mhm.
it's a way for me to like challenge myself. Like if this was me, if I am this character in this world, what would I do to earn an income, to earn money, to
Yeah,
to
sure.
be the big wig in this tiny town? Now's my chance, right? Let's do it. But at the same time, it's like it's missing that other
Yeah.
piece, and that's kind
Yeah,
of like
missing
the
a sort of a soul.
yes, yeah, thank you, yeah. I mean, that's I guess that's the best way to put it right there. It's missing like it's
Hmm,
missing its soul. It doesn't have that. It's an awesome mechanic.
right,
Obviously, that mechanic wouldn't go well if our characters were traveling from land to airship to desert to North Pole to underwater adventures because we're
right.
never going to be back in the
Sorta need to
town.
be settled down a little.
Right. Yeah, but we're one location attacking one thing consistently that is
Mhm.
just a trove of different things
Right.
and experiences. So yeah, it's very easy to go back and forth and to really focus on that awesome mechanic of building this town.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That's interesting. I'm really glad that uh, we got to compare those two because I don't think that I was trying, to not do that. I guess when I think about it, I would like it to be interesting, right? Like or have us all, to
Sure.
use the same term that we did earlier, and um yeah, it's like maybe I did lose that a bit in the mechanic part of the game.
Well,
And
no, I don't necessarily, just to correct you, sorry to interrupt. I don't necessarily think it's you. I think it's just a
mm,
combination of the game all of us as players expect to have,
mhm,
which is very mechanic based, but also that's why I gave such high compliments to who we played with in the other game, because she was
right.
real big on role play. The characters I currently play with kind of aren't.
I agree.
So
And that I think that does have a lot of weight to it.
yeah,
Um and yeah, and I'm actually that is something I'm thinking about kind of a lot lately is how to get people out of their shell. I'm gonna be hosting a table at the hobby shop near me, and my table is going to be the learning table, right? So it's going to be like the expectation will be that we're going a little slower, that that we're going to pause to exemplify things, or to describe, like, oh, this is exactly what this spell does. These are the words that it uses to describe them, and that's why this is what is going to happen, right? And I want to do that so that people can get away from the mechanical part and into the role play part as much as possible, right? Like because and I think we mentioned this, more toward the beginning, is there is an amount of knowledge you need to have of the thing in order to, you know, improvise thoughts about it, right? Like it's different than like being an actor and knowing your lines. It is being an actor and having to make up your lines on the spot, and also you need to remember mechanically what the thing that you are doing will do, and there's three different dice that you need to do during this turn in order to make it happen, right? Like, so there's
right,
it's not just the improv part. There is a like underlying foundation that needs to happen as well in order to make things real in the in the game space. And yeah, and so I think that is I think that that's part of it for sure, is that if people who are good at role play and not the game, that is, I think, I think they're like, sort of more charismatic or whatever, they enjoy talking to people, and that's a little bit easier to work with. But people who are like who like don't know the game at all and also aren't very charismatic, they
right.
are, they are doing like four times the work
Yeah,
that you need to do in order to play the game a certain way, and I think maybe that's why you find certain kinds of like min maxers or whatever, and they just bomb straight through the walls of the mechanics of the game in order to destroy things as quickly as possible. And they're not role playing; they're just trying to beat the game
right,
in some weird way. And um, and that's clearly not the type of game that we are getting into. And so there's a learning curve that Yeah, that it's it takes a while, and we're only playing for what do they say? It takes like 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, and
Oh, yep.
and we're only playing for 3 or 4 hours every week, so it's going to take like I don't know,
40 more years.
20, yeah, it's gonna take like 20,000 weeks or something,
Yep.
and it's like, so yeah, it's like, we, we just, kind of, I mean, well, I will say there's an amount of patient that you have to be, and then there's like an amount of like maybe maybe sort of like change up the way that I'm DMing a little bit so that it involves more sort of like poking at the player to do something, right? And kind of be like a little more insistent it's your turn to do something. And
Yeah, and I have a
yeah.
question. I was waiting for us to get along like that line of
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
So, you know, one thing that so earlier I mentioned how I try not to do things sometimes because my character is
Right.
distracted and I like to role play that out. Like, even in the game on Saturday nights, my character was sleeping.
Yeah.
And it was like someone burst into the train and said, "Oh my god, there's spiders." And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm sleeping." And then one of the players we play with was just kind of just like, "Okay." Almost like annoyed by that. And I'm like, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if that was in character or not, but I was kind of like, whatever. Like, I'm not going to respond to it. It's just, it is what it is.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, I'm not going to, my character is doing something and I don't want to react to this thing because I want to see what everybody else kind of does. And I know how
Yeah.
my character is going to react regardless of whether, you know, whether he wakes up or not. I know what's going to end up happening. So it's kind of like, but with that, it was one of those things where when you ask for a check to be made, um, for role play reasons, I have seen some games where you don't roll unless you're proficient in it. And I
Mhm.
don't know, I don't think that's a 5e rule. I don't think that's a requirement, but like it's one of those things where, yeah, if I'm not very perceptive and I'm not proficient in it, why would I be perceiving things other than my passive perception?
Right.
Or why would I be rolling on history checks when my character could give a shit about what the history of anything is, even
Sure.
though he has a 1 in it or a 2 in it, but he's not proficient in it.
Right.
So it comes down to those situations where it's like, okay, you're investigating a body, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're all 6 of us are gonna roll investigation.
Sure,
And it's like,
yes.
well, why? And then because now we have 6 opportunities to roll a 20, when really we should have 1. And if nobody's proficient in it, then I mean, just the person doing the act should be rolling, maybe with help from one other person.
Mhm.
So I guess like as a DM, I mean, how do you have you thought of something like that before or incorporating something like that, or like do you think that does help role play, or maybe it's just kind of like a mechanic that doesn't really, like, it's not part of 5e, so why do it kind of thing? And then how does
Mm.
that apply to the game we play on Thursdays?
Sure, sure, yeah. I think in general, I don't usually allow people to sort of pile on, um, to things, especially if they're, like, not, as intentionally present for the thing, right? Like like, and I think maybe you're sort of alluding a little bit to like door opening or maybe like listening at a door or something, and
That's the
um
most common thing we roll for.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
and and so like if all three of you are at the door and you fail, um or it's like I try not to be like, okay, if you all are at the door, you get to all try, right? But like for the and I've tried too to not make all doors stuck. I think that
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that generally that, common doors should be relatively unstuck, and then like there's like certain passages where if if you go through that way, then it's a shorter distance, but it is you could make some noise trying to open the door, right? Like
Yeah,
that's generally what I think about it. I don't think that's the actual, like, that's not the rules as written. So I guess to answer your question, like I would like to not have the pile-on effect happen in general, right? Like I would like to have, the person who is actually facing that direction roll a perception check, or the person who is actually proficient in medicine, right? Like that is something that I think in general I'll be like, "Oh yeah, like this if something is like above what you would be even capable of rolling, but then maybe it's a dire situation and the fighter is like, oh my god, I need to get the cleric up, otherwise we're gonna be fucked. And I'll be like, all right, well, if you roll like if you roll a nat 20 on a medicine check, you fucking like can punch him in the chest and restart his heart or something, right?
right.
Like that, like maybe if it narratively makes sense in a in a way, I would be a bit lenient. But for the most part, yeah, I think that people tend to maybe overdo it with the whole like, oh well, you didn't fail, you failed, so I'll take my turn in the
Right.
line, and instead of like maybe like, oh well, that door's stuck, you're either gonna need, and I think I did do this like one of the first sessions, it's like, oh well, no, that door's stuck, you're gonna need a crowbar to get it open, but it'll
Yeah.
be loud,
Yeah, I had one.
and
Yep.
right, and
Which
it's
is
like
fine. That's fine.
that,
Yeah,
yeah, and
absolutely.
so that's an option, is like maybe like have them do it but with a consequence, right? And I think that's kind of what I'm starting to lean towards, is like trying to which is why I like uh the wandering monster mechanic, because it's like it is a thing that you are generally trying to avoid, and also you could risk it and be okay, like maybe nobody takes any damage, but also like if you lose the initiative and something, and like a few skeletons come up behind you and you guys have nowhere to go because this door is stuck, that could be like the end of somebody, right? Like
Right.
it is supposed to be dangerous. um yeah, so yeah, I think you guys haven't really run into that, but like it only takes one time, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's like, that's sort of the rules of the game that maybe we haven't quite dove into yet, because nobody has really made any dire mistakes, or you guys have kind of been fairly quiet, like there's been a couple times where a monster showed up randomly, and you were able to deal with it, but like for the most part, there was that one time that I don't think you were there, and oh no, 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 you were there. It was when you were carrying the oil back, and um Valentine ran off like on his own to pursue the little frog thing, and he took a hit,
Yep.
and that he could have taken another hit and been basically dead. And I was like, ooh,
Yeah, I
it was
remember
pretty,
that.
it was pretty close.
I think I made the comment of this is where we die because like we're just
Mhm.
running through a fucking dungeon.
Yeah.
Like
Or if you or if you hadn't held the NPC in front of you
Right, I
when
got
you
shot
went
by a
through that
crossbow.
door. Yeah, you would have had to
Yeah,
either break your shield, which is the mechanic we're using, or take a crossbow bolt to the chest, which is bad. You do
right.
not want to take a
Oh,
crossbow bolt
that's
to the chest.
that's why I led with the NPC though, because I
Yeah,
was like, "Oh, free
yeah,
shield,"
like
right?
as a
Hopefully,
shield, two shields,
yeah,
one meat shield, one
yep,
regular shield.
hopefully he misses whatever's on the other side of this door, but if not, oh well.
That was
Right,
a
but see
funny.
that right there though, like, so you a couple things you mentioned the whole, yeah, you guys are doing a thing and you failed, so here's the consequence of that failure. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of DMs kind of miss that piece
Mm,
because it's like, going back to the stupid door thing, doors are the easiest examples to use.
you're right.
All right, the door is locked. It's wedged shut, whatever. You try to burn it, it's not flammable, whatever it might be.
Right, right.
The door doesn't open. All 4 to 6 of your players are sitting there like, well, now what? And then you just sit there in silence. But in reality, what should
Yeah.
happens is all 6 of you failed, and then from around the corner comes a minotaur, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And it's like, oh god, oh look, the minotaur had a key. Ha! But what are the odds? Right? Like it's like now the players get to go
Yeah.
on.
Sure,
Right,
yeah.
but that was the result of all of the failure. It was like, "Oh, well, now I'm gonna have this creature show up that's part of the area or the dungeon because of all the noise, because of all the talking and noise these players are making to check out what's going on." And, it just so happens he knew the passcode and had it written down on a sticky note or whatever it might be, right? So
Right, yeah. That yes, that is a good example of like, like, oh, well, there's a consequence, but, it doesn't always let you keep going further, but
no, it does
like,
not.
but like
It might give a hint,
in
though, to leave the door, to stop
sure.
trying on the damn door.
Yes, yeah. Or at the very least, like, okay, you guys dealt with that thing, you can try the door again. Like
Well, yeah,
like
absolutely. You could always go back to it again
yeah,
and
if
see
they
what
really
happened.
wanna open the
Go
door,
the damn door. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also that could have another consequence too. And I think that's something that DMs miss. You don't. You do a very good job of that piece of it, like of
Mm.
the wandering monster and the mechanics and being quiet and actually rolling to see what's gonna happen.
Mhm.
I
Yeah, and
think a
it's
lot of DMs miss that
maybe
part.
you're lucky a few times, but then like that one time, there's like a troll or like a platoon of orcs comes friggin' walking down the thing, or you get surprised by a monster like that. It's like that could happen if you guys are not paying attention, and that is very dangerous. And so it's yeah, it is a give and take. There's certain instances where you want to be a little bit mean, and there's certain instances where you want to be a little bit lenient, especially if like, oh well, this is the only door in the dungeon that we haven't opened. It's like, well, you can try again, but I'm gonna roll
Right.
for a wandering monster. Like that's usually what I will do in that situation. It's like, oh, they,
Sure.
you're spending enough time to open the door, but actually, that brings up a good. I just remembered, like, real quick, as an example, there used to be a thing which I don't think you would have ever heard of. Maybe depends on who you played with, but there used to be a thing, and I don't think it's a thing anymore in the newer editions, where you could take 10 or take 20, and you would be allowed to, if you were not being harried or hurried in any way, to just assume that the roll of the die was a 10, and you would still use your bonuses, but like, so like if it was so for example, if you were like a rogue and you wanted to open a lock and there was no one around, you could just take 10 on the lock and see if it'll open, but it takes you a minute, right? So it takes you an amount of time rather than the, if you like successfully roll on the die, you would open it immediately or whatever, and then time wouldn't be an issue. But like if you didn't care about how long it took, sort of like a ritual spell, I guess.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I've heard of this. This is something I've ran into before, and I've argued it as a player before.
mhm,
As a player, I've been put in situations with DMs that maybe were struggling a little bit in that area of, um, pacing or giving the details we need to decide, or even giving a direction maybe. And there's been situations where it's like, okay, we've all tried to open up this thing, we've all failed.
right.
And then the DM's like, "What do you guys want to do?" And someone's like, "Well, I'm gonna try it again." He's like, "Oh yeah, go ahead." And then we all fail again. Well, now what do you want to do? We're gonna try again. Okay, well, you all failed again. We all roll and fail.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I've sat there before as a player saying, "Well, can't we just assume that we've gotten this thing open? Right? We've spent three
Right, yeah,
turns now, or
yeah.
three and a half turns working on this, and nothing has happened. Nothing has stopped us. So can we just assume we get it open?" And the DM will usually almost every time was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you guys open up the treasure chest. It's not a mimic." And I'm like, okay, what was the point of
Yeah.
all that then? Why
Right,
did you even make this
exactly.
roll to begin with?
What was
Why is
the
it locked?
point? Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that is the big thing. It's like, why not just let it be open, and,
right,
it's like, I'm not just letting it be open, like, there's a small consequence, you're taking time, and the time might lead to something else, but you're right. It is kind of silly to make the mechanics play the game for you rather than you just storying through the time it would take. There's no danger, so like why are you rolling 20
right,
rolls and not succeeding? unless
exactly,
unless there is unless it's like, oh no, you need a key, right? Like that could be a thing, but like generally you should explain things in such a way that you know the characters, or sorry, the players know that it is impossible right away, right? It's like, oh, there's
right,
a secret type of lock, or you need the combination and you don't have the combination. It's like you couldn't really brute for like anything above a 4 or a 5, you know seated lock, like even with just the base numbers, like it would take you for fucking ever to brute force it. So like there's no time element that wouldn't be you sitting there for maybe a whole day and just trying different things over and over again, uh which would be silly to
yep,
play out, or whatever.
absolutely,
So
absolutely,
yeah, but yeah, so um well, I do have more questions, but I think that it might be time to take a break, and
yeah, we can do that. I'm gonna
we
pause.
can get back to back to everything in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our discussion. We will be taking a short break, so feel free to loot the adjoining rooms or complete a downtime activity while our guest drinks another potion of glibness, as his first has run its course. Return for part 2 to hear more from the charming Max Anthem, and may your dice write a narrative worth remembering.